Chapter 1. Two Worlds. I'll begin my story with an experience from the time when I was about 10 or 11 years old and went to the Latin school in our little town. A lot of smells bring me there and touches me within the pain and the pleasant shutters, dark alleys and bright ones, houses and towers, clocks and human faces, rooms full of comfort and warmth, rooms full of mystery and deep fears of ghosts. It smells of a warm confinement, of rabbits and maids, of home remedies and dried fruit. Two worlds ran together there, day and night, coming from two poles. One world was the father's house, but it was even narrower. It really only included my parents. This world was mostly well known to me. It was called Mother and Father. It was called Love and Serenity, Role Model and School. To this world belonged mild splendor, clarity, and cleanliness. Here were soft, friendly speeches, washed hands, clean clothes, and good manners at home. Here the morning choral was sung. Here Christmas was celebrated. In this world there were straight lines and paths that led to the future. There was duty and guilt, bad conscience and confession, forgiveness and good intentions, love and reverence, the word of the Bible and wisdom. Our future had to belong to this world, so it had to be clear and clean, beautiful and orderly. The other world, meanwhile, began right in the middle of our own house and was completely different, smelled different, spoke differently, promised and demanded different things. In this second world there were maids and tradesmen, ghost stories and scandalous rumors. There was a colorful flood of monstrous, alluring, terrible, mysterious things like slaughterhouses and jails, drunks and nagging women, cows giving birth, fallen horses, tales of burglaries, manslaughter, suicide. All these beautiful and dreadful, wild and cruel things were around. In the next house, policemen and tramps ran around, drunks hit their wives, knots of young girls spilled out of factories in the evenings, old women could charm you and make you ill, robbers lived in the woods, arsonists were caught by provincial police. This second violent world swelled and smelled everywhere. Everywhere. Not only in our rooms where Mother and Father were. And that was very good. It was wonderful that we had peace, order, and tranquility here, duty and a clear conscience, forgiveness and love, and wonderful that there was everything else too, everything that was loud and glaring, gloomy and violent, with which you could escape with a jump to the Mother. And the strangest thing was how the two worlds bordered, how close they were. For example, our maid, Lena. When she sat by the door in the living room at prayer in the evening and sang along with her clear voice, laying her washed hands on our smoothed apron, then she belonged completely to Father and Mother, to us, into the light and right. Immediately afterwards, in the kitchen or in the wooden stable, when she told me the story of the little man without a head, or when she was arguing with the women next door, or at the butcher's, or in the little shop, then she was someone else, belonged to another world, was surrounded by mystery. And so it was with everything, most of all with myself. Certainly I belonged to the bright and proper world. I was my parents' child. But whenever I turned my eyes and ears, the other was everywhere, and I also lived in the other, although it was often strange and uncanny to me, although one regularly there got a bad conscience and fear. At times I even loved living in the forbidden world, and often the homecoming into the light, necessary and good as it might be, was almost like a return to the less beautiful, the more tedious and desolate. Sometimes I knew my goal in life was to become like my father and mother, so bright and pure, so superior and orderly, but it was a long way to get there, and until then you had to do school and study and take rehearsals and exams, and the path always led past the other darker world, through it, and it was not at all impossible to stay with it and sink into it. There were stories of prodigal sons who had been like this. I read them with passion. There was always returning home to the Father, and to the good so redeeming and great. I did feel that that alone was right, good, and desirable, and yet that part of the story which took place among the wicked and lost was far more alluring. And if it might have been said and admitted, it was actually sometimes outright pity that the lost repented and was found again. But you didn't say that, and you didn't think it either. It was just there somehow, as a hunch or a possibility, way down in feelings. When I pictured the devil, I could well picture him on the street below, in disguise or openly, or at the fair or in a tavern, but never in our house. My sisters also belonged to the light world. It seemed to me that they were essentially closer to their father and mother. They were better, more civilized, more faultless than I was. They had flaws, they had bad habits, but it didn't seem to me that it went very deep. It wasn't like me, where contact with evil was often so difficult and tormenting, where the dark world was much closer. The sisters, like the parents, were to be treated with respect, and if one had a quarrel with them, one was afterwards, before them, always the bad guy, the instigator, the one who had to ask for forgiveness. Because in the sisters one insulted the parents, the good and commanding, there were secrets I could share with the most despicable street urchins far sooner than with my sisters. On good days, when it was light and one's conscience was in order, it was often delightful to play with one's sisters, to be good and civil with them, and to see oneself in a good, noble appearance. That's how it had to be an angel. That was the most we knew, and we thought it sweet and wonderful to be angels surrounded by a light sound and scent like Christmas and happiness. Oh, how seldom such hours and days come! I was often at the game, at good, harmless, legitimate games, with a passion and vehemence which became too much for the sisters, which led to quarrels and unhappiness, and when anger came over me, I was terrible, and did and said things whose depravity I felt deeply and burning, even as I did and said them. Then came bad, dark hours of remorse and contrition, and then the painful moment when I asked for forgiveness, and then on again, in a ray of light, a quiet, grateful happiness without discord, for hours or moments. I went to the Latin school. The son of the mayor and the head forester were in my class and came to me from time to time. Wild boys, and yet members of the good, allowed world. In spite of this, I had close relationships with the neighboring boys, elementary school students, whom we otherwise despised. I must begin my story with one of them. On a free afternoon when I was a little over 10, I hung out with the two boys from the neighborhood. Then a bigger one came along, a strong and rough boy of about 13, an elementary school boy, the son of a tailor. His father was a drunk and the whole family had a bad reputation. I knew Franz Cromer well. I was afraid of him, and I didn't like it when he joined us now. He already had manly manners and imitated the walk and speeches of the young factory boys. With his guidance we descended to the shore by the bridge and hid from the world under the first arch. The narrow bank between the arched bridge wall and the sluggishly flowing water consisted of rubbish, shards and junk, tangled bundles of rusted iron wire and other rubbish. Sometimes useful things were found there. We had to search the route under Franz Cromer's guidance and show him what we found. Then he either put it into his pocket or threw it out into the water. He told us to look out for things made of lead, brass, or tin, which he took with him, including an old horn comb. I felt very uneasy in his company, not because I knew that my father would forbid me to go there if he knew about it, but because I was afraid of Franz himself. I was glad that he took me, and treated me like the others. He commanded, and we obeyed. It was as if it were an old custom, even though it was my first time with him. Finally we sat down on the floor. Franz spat in the water and looked like a man. He spat through a gap in his teeth and hit where he wanted. A conversation began, and the boys started boasting and bragging about all sorts of student heroic deeds and nasty pranks. I said nothing, and yet feared, precisely because of being silent, that it might draw the wrath of Cromer upon me. 2 of my comrades had separated me from the beginning, and had professed to him. I was a stranger among them, and felt that my dress and my manners were a challenge to them. As a Latin student and a boy, Franz possibly couldn't love me, and I felt that the other 2 would deny me and abandon me as soon as it came down to it. Finally, out of sheer fear, I began to talk. I made up a great story of a robbery, and made myself the hero of it. In a garden near the Ickmühl, I said, I and a friend stole a sackful of apples during the night, and not ordinary ones, but nothing but the finest rennet and gold parmens, the best sorts. I took refuge from the dangers of the moment in this story that I was used to inventing and telling. In order not to stop immediately and maybe get involved in something worse, I let my art shine. One of us, I always said, had to stand sentinel, while the other was in the tree throwing down the apples, and the sack was so heavy, in the end we had to open it again and leave half behind, but we came back half an hour later, and I got the rest too. When I was finished, I hoped for some applause. I had finally warmed up and had gotten drunk on telling stories. The 2 little ones were silent, waiting, but Franz Cromer looked at me penetratingly through half-closed eyes and asked in a threatening voice, "Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "So really and truly?" Yes, really and truly, I protested defiantly, internally choking with fear. Can you swear? I was very shocked, but I immediately said yes. So say, by God and happiness. I said, by God and salvation. He then said, well, and turned away. I thought he was fine with that, and was glad when he soon got up and started on the way back. When we were on the bridge, I said timidly that I had to go home now. It won't be that pressing, laughed Franz. We have the same path. He slowly sauntered on, and I dared not to escape, but he really went the way towards our house. When we were there, when I saw our front door and the thick brass handle, the sun in the windows and the curtains in my mother's room, I took a deep breath. Oh, homecoming! Oh, good, blessed return home, into the light, into peace. As I quickly opened the door and slipped inside, ready to slam it behind me, Franz Cromer pushed his way in with me. In the cool, gloomy tiled corridor, which only got light from the courtyard, he stood by me, held my arm, and said quietly, "Don't push so hard, you." I looked at him, startled. His grip on my arm was as tight as iron. I wondered what he might be up to, and whether he meant to mistreat me. If I screamed now, I thought, screamed loud and hard, would someone from above be there soon enough to save me? But I gave up. "What is it?" I asked. "What do you want?" "Not much. I just have to ask you one more thing. The others don't need to hear that." "So? Yes, what else can I tell you? I have to go up, you know." "You know," said Franz quietly, "who owns the orchard at the corner mill?" "No, I do not know. I think the miller." Franz had wrapped his arm around me and was now pulling me so close that I had to look him in the face at close range. His eyes were evil, he smiled wickedly, and his face was full of cruelty and power. "Yes, my boy, I can already tell you who owns the garden. I've known for a long time that the apples were stolen, and I also know that the man said he'd give 2 marks to anyone who could tell him who stole the fruit." "Dear God," I cried. "But you won't tell him anything." I felt it would be useless to appeal to his sense of honor. He was from the other world. For him treason was not a crime. I felt it. In these things the people from the other world were not like us. "Say nothing?" Cromer laughed. "Dear friend, do you think I'm a counterfeiter? That I can make 2-mark pieces for myself? I'm a poor guy. I don't have a rich father like you. And if I can earn 2 marks, do I have to earn it? Maybe he even gives me more." He suddenly let go of me. Our hall no longer smelled of peace and security. The world collapsed around me. He would report me. I was a criminal. They would tell my father. Maybe the police would even come. All the horrors of chaos threatened me. Everything ugly and dangerous was arrayed against me. The fact that I hadn't stolen at all was irrelevant. I had also sworn. My God! Tears welled up in my eyes. I felt that I had to buy myself free, and desperately felt in all my pockets. There was no apple, no pocket-knife, nothing at all. Then I remembered my watch. It was an old silver watch, and it didn't work. I wore it just because. It came from our grandmother. I quickly pulled it out. "Cromer," I said, "listen. You don't have to show me off. That would be nice of you. You don't have to send me off. That wouldn't be nice of you. I want to give you my watch. Look there. Unfortunately, I don't have anything else. You can have it. It is made of silver, and the movement is good. It has only one small defect. It needs to be repaired." He smiled and took the watch into his large hand. I looked at that hand and felt how raw and deeply hostile it was to me, reaching for my life and peace. "It's made of silver," I said timidly. "I don't give a damn about your silver and that old clock there," he said with deep content. "Just let them fix it yourself." "But Franz," I cried, trembling with fear that he might run away, "wait a little. Take the watch. She really is silver, real and true, and I don't have anything else." He looked at me coolly and contemptuously. "So you know who I'm going to, or I can also tell the police. I know the sergeant well." He turned to go. I held him back by the sleeve. It couldn't be. I would much rather have died than endure what would happen if he went like this. "Franz," I begged hoarsely with excitement, "don't do stupid things. Is this just for fun?" "Yeah, fun, but it can get expensive for you." "Tell me, Franz, what should I do? I want to do anything." He squinted at me and laughed again. "Don't be stupid," he said with false good nature. "You know it as well as I do. I can earn 2 marks, and I'm not a rich man to throw them away. You know that. But you're rich. You even have a watch. All you have to do is give me the 2 marks, and everything will be fine." I got the logic. But 2 marks? For me that was as much and as unobtainable as 10, like 100, like 1,000 marks. I had no money. There was a savings bank that stood by my mother. There were a few 10 and 5 pfennig pieces in it from my visiting my uncles and such occasions. I had nothing else. I didn't get pocket money at that age. I have nothing, I said sadly. I don't have any money. But otherwise I want to give you everything. I have an Indian book, and soldiers, and a compass. I can get him for you. Cromer just twitched his bold, evil mouth and spat on the floor. Don't waste words, he said commandingly. You can keep your rags. A compass? Don't make me angry, you hear? And give me the money. I don't have one. I don't have any. I never get any money. It's not my fault. Then you'll bring me the 2 marks tomorrow. I'll wait down by the market after school. Done with that. Now if you don't bring me any money, you'll see. Yes, but where should I get it from? Lord, if I don't have one. If there isn't enough money in your house, that's your problem. So tomorrow after school, and I'll tell you, if you don't bring it. He shot me a terrible look, spat again, and was gone like a shadow. I couldn't go up. My life was destroyed. I thought about running away and never coming back, or about drowning myself. But these were not clear images. I sat down in the dark and lowest step of our house stairs, crouched tightly inside myself, and surrendered to misfortune. There Lena found me, crying as she came down with a basket to get wood. I asked her not to say anything and went upstairs. On the rake next to the glass door hung my father's hat and my mother's parasol. Homeland and tenderness flowed towards me from all these things. My heart greeted them pleadingly and gratefully, like the prodigal son greeted the sight and smell of the old home. But none of that belonged to me any more. It was all the bright world of my father and mother, and I was deeply and guiltily sunk in the foreign flood, entangled in adventure and sin, threatened by the enemy and awaited by dangers, fear, and shame. The hat and the parasol, the good old sandstone floor, the large picture above the closet hall, and from the inside of the living room my old sister's voice, all of that was nicer, more tender, more delicious than ever. But it was no longer a comfort and a sure thing. It was pure reproach. All of this was no longer mine. I couldn't share in the serenity and stillness. I wore dirt on my feet, and I could not shake it off on the mat. I brought it with me, shadows the home world knew not. How many secrets I had, how much anxiety, but it had all been fun and games against what I brought with me into these rooms today. Destiny ran after me. Hands were stretched out for me, from which even my mother could not protect me, of which she was not allowed to know. Whether my crime was a theft or a lie, hadn't I sworn a false oath by God and salvation? It didn't matter. My sin wasn't this or that. My sin was shaking hands with the devil. Why did I go? Why had I obeyed Cromer better than my own father? Why had I lied about the story of the theft, bragged about crimes like they were heroic deeds? Now the devil was holding my hand. Now the enemy was after me. For a moment I no longer felt the fear of tomorrow, but above all the dreadful certainty that my path now led even further downhill and into the dark. I felt clearly that the new offenses must follow from my offense, that my appearance at the siblings, my greeting and kiss to my parents was a lie, that I carried with me a fate and a secret that I hid from them. For a moment trust and hope flashed up in me as I looked at my father's hat. I would tell him everything. I would take his judgment and punishment upon myself and make him my accomplice and savior. It would only be a penance such that I had often endured, a heavy, bitter hour, a heavy and remorseful plea for forgiveness. How sweet that sounded, how attractive it was, but there was nothing with it. I knew I wouldn't do it. I knew that now I had a secret, a guilt that I must eat out on my own. Maybe I was at a crossroads right now. Maybe from this hour I would belong to the bad forever and ever, and share secrets with the bad, depend on them, obey them, become their own. I had played the man and hero. Now I had to bear what followed. I was glad that my father fussed over my wet shoes when I entered. It was a distraction. He didn't know what was worse, and I was allowed to endure one reproach, which I secretly related to the other. At the same time, a strange new feeling flared up in me, a nasty and stinging feeling full of barbs. I felt superior to my father. I felt, for one moment, a certain contempt for his ignorance. His scolding about the wet boots seemed petty to me. If you only knew, I thought. feeling like a criminal being interrogated about a stolen bread roll while having to confess to murder. It was an ugly and repulsive feeling, but it was strong and had a deep appeal, and it bound me to my secret and guilt more tightly than any other thought. Maybe, I thought, Cromer has already gone to the police and reported me, and thunderstorms are gathering over me while they look at me like a little child. From this whole experience, as far as has been related up to now, this moment was the most important and lasting. It was the first tear in the Father's holiness. It was the first cut in the pillars on which my childhood life had rested, and on which every other human being before he himself can become must have destroyed. The inner essential line of our destiny consists of these experiences, which nobody sees. Such a cut and tear heals again. It is healed and forgotten, but in the most secret chamber it lives and bleeds on. I myself immediately shuddered at the new feeling that I should have kissed my father's feet immediately afterwards to apologize. But you can't apologize for anything essential, and a child feels and knows that as well and deeply as any wise man. I felt the need to think about my cause, to ponder ways for tomorrow, but I didn't get to it. All I had to do the whole evening was getting used to the changed air in our living room. Wall clock and table, Bible and mirror, bookshelf and pictures on the wall said farewell to me, so to speak. I had to watch with a freezing heart as my world, how my good, happy life became the past and separated from me, and I had to feel how I was anchored and held fast with new, sucking roots outside in the dark and strange. I tasted death for the first time, and death tastes bitter, for it is birth, fear and dread of terrible innovation. I was glad when I finally lay in my bed. Before that, as the last purgatory, evening prayers had passed over me, and we had sung a song that was one of my favorites. Oh, I didn't sing along, and every note was gall and poison for me. I did not pray when my father spoke the blessing, and when he ended, "Be with us all," a convulsion tore me away from this circle. The grace of God was with them all, but no longer with me. I left cold and deeply tired. When I lay in bed for a while, when I was lovingly surrounded by warmth and security, my heart strayed back once more in fear, anxious about the past. As always, my mother had said good night to me. Her footsteps still echoed in the room. The glow of her candle still glowed in the crack of the door. Now, I thought, she's coming back again. She felt it. She kisses me and asks kindly and promisingly, and then I can cry, then the stone in my throat melts, then I hug her and say it to her, and then it is good, then rescue is here. And when the crack in the door was already dark, I listened for a while, and thought it must happen. Then I got back to things and faced my enemy. I saw him clearly. He had one eye closed, his mouth laughed raw, and as I looked at him and ate the inevitable inside, he grew bigger and uglier, and his evil eye gleamed devilishly. He was close to me until I fell asleep, but then I didn't dream about him or about today. I dreamed that we were all sailing in a boat, my parents and sisters and I, and we were surrounded by the sheer peace and splendor of a vacation day. I awoke in the middle of the night, still feeling the aftertaste of bliss, still seeing my sister's white summer dresses shimmering in the sun, and falling from all paradise back to what was, and again faced the enemy with the evil eye. In the morning, when my mother came hurriedly and called that it was getting late and why I was still in bed, I looked bad, and when she asked if I was wrong, I threw up. Something seemed gained with that. I loved being a little sick and being able to stay in bed for a morning with chamomile tea, listening to my mother tidying up in the next room and how Lima met the butcher in the hallway outside. The morning without school was something enchanted and fairy-tale-like. The sun then played into the room, and wasn't the same sun against which the green curtains were drawn at school. But even that didn't taste good today, and had gotten the wrong sound. Yes, if I had died. But I was just a little uncomfortable, as I'd often been, and that didn't do anything. That protected me from school, but it didn't protect me at all from Cromer, who was waiting for me in the market at 11. And this time the mother's kindness was without consolation. It was annoying and painful. I soon pretended to be asleep again and thought. Nothing helped. I had to be at the market at 11 o'clock. So I got up quietly at 10 o'clock and said that I had felt better. They said, as usual in such cases, that I must either go to bed again or go to school in the afternoon. I said I liked going to school. I had made a plan. I wasn't allowed to come to Cromer without money. I had to get my hands on the little piggy bank that was mine. There wasn't enough money in it, I knew that. Not nearly enough. But it was something, and a cent told me that something was better than nothing, and that Cromer must at least be appeased. I felt bad when I slipped into my mother's room in my socks and took it from her desk, but it wasn't as bad as yesterday. The pounding heart choked me, and it didn't get any better when down the stairwell when I first examined it, I found that the can was locked. It was very easy to break open. All you had to do was tear through a thin sheet of metal grid, but the tear hurt. Only then had I committed theft. Until then, I had only nibbled pieces of sugar and fruit. Now this was stolen, although it was my own money. I felt myself getting a step closer to Cromer and his world, descending so nicely step by step, and defied it. The devil take me. Now there was no turning back. I counted the money with fear. It had sounded so full in the can. Now it was miserably little in the hand. I was 65 pfennigs. I hid the tin in the hall below, held the money in my closed hand, and left the house in a different way than I had ever walked through this gate. Someone was calling me upstairs, it seemed to me. I walked away quickly. There was still a lot of time. I avoided detours, though, the streets of a changed city, under unseen clouds, past houses that looked at me and people who suspected me. On the way I remembered that a school friend of mine had once found a thaler in the cattle market. I would have liked to pray that God would work a miracle and let me make such a find, but I no longer had the right to pray, and even then the box would not have become whole again. Franz Cromer saw me from afar, but he was walking towards me very slowly, and didn't seem to be paying attention to me. When he was near me, he gave me an ordering sign that I should follow him, and, without looking back once, walked calmly down the Stromgasse over the footbridge until stopped at the last house in front of a new building. No work was done there. The walls stood bare without doors and windows. Cromer looked around and went in through the door. I followed him. He stepped behind the wall, beckoned me over, and held out his hand. "Got it?" he asked coolly. I pulled my clenched hand out of my pocket and poured my money into his palm. He had counted it before the last 5 had ended. "That's 65 pfennigs," he said, looking at me. "Yes," I said shyly. "That's all I have. It's not enough, I know well, but it is everything. I don't have any more." "I thought you would have been smarter," he scolded with almost mild rebuke. "There should be order among men of honor. I don't want to take anything from you that isn't right, you know that. Take your nickels back there. The other one, you know who, isn't trying to downplay me. He pays. But this is what I have and no more. It was my savings bank. That's your problem. But I don't want to make you unhappy. You still owe me 1 mark and 35 pfennigs. When do I get it?" "Oh, you'll have her, Cromer. I don't know how. Maybe I'll have more soon, tomorrow or the day after. You understand that I can't tell my father. That does not concern me. I am not such that I want to harm you. I could have my money before noon, you see, and I'm poor. You wear nice clothes and get better lunches than I do, but I don't want to say anything. I want to wait a little for my sake. The day after tomorrow I'll whistle for you. In the afternoon you fix it. You know my whistle?" He whistled it for me. I had heard it often. "Yes," I said, "I know." He walked away like I didn't belong with him. It had been a deal between us. Nothing more. Even today, I think Cromer's whistle would startle me if I suddenly heard it again. From then on, I listened to it often. It seemed to me that I heard it over and over again. There was no place, no play, no work, no thought where that whistle did not reach, that made me dependent, which was now my destiny. I was often in our little flower garden, which I loved very much, on the soft, colorful autumn afternoons, and a strange urge made me take up the boy's plays of earlier epochs again. I played, so to speak, a boy who was younger than me, who was still good and free, innocent and secure, but right in the middle, always as expected, and yet always terribly disturbing and surprising, came Cromer's whistle from somewhere, cut the thread, destroyed the imagination. Then I had to go. I had to follow my tormentor to bad and ugly places. I had to answer to him, and I had to be reminded for money. The whole thing may have lasted a few weeks, but to me it seemed like years, like an eternity. I rarely had money, a 5 or a penny, stolen from the kitchen table when Lena left the market basket there. Each time Cromer scolded me and showered me with contempt. It was I who wanted to deceive him and deprave him of his right. It was I who stole from him. It was I who made him unhappy. Rarely in my life had misery come so close to my heart. Seldom have I felt greater hopelessness, greater dependency. I had filled the piggy bank with tokens and put it back in its place. Nobody asked for it. But that, too, could come over me any day. I was often more afraid of my mother than of Cromer's raw whistle when she quietly came up to me. Didn't she come to ask me about the bank? Since I am at many times without money, my devil appeared. He began to torment and use me in other ways. I had to work for him. He had to arrange exits for his father. I had to arrange them for him. Or he would have me do something difficult, hop on one leg for 10 minutes, stick a piece of paper on a passerby's skirt. In dreams of many nights I continued these plagues and lay in the sweat of nightmare. I got sick for a while. I vomited often and was slightly cold, but at night I lay in sweat and heat. My mother felt something was wrong and showed me much sympathy, which tormented me because I could not return it with trust. One evening, when I was already in bed, she brought me a piece of chocolate. It was a reminiscence of earlier years, when in the evenings, when I'd been good, I'd often been given such comforting bites to fall asleep. Now she stood there and held out the piece of chocolate to me. I was in so much pain I could only shake my head. She asked what was wrong with me. She stroked my hair. All I could say was, "Don't. Not. I don't want anything." She put the chocolate on the bedside table and left. When she wanted to ask me about it the next day, I pretended I didn't know anything about it. Once she brought me to the doctor, who examined me and prescribed cold washes in the morning. My condition at that time was a kind of madness. In the middle of the orderly peace of our house, I lived shy and tormented like a ghost, taking no part in the lives of others, and rarely forgetting myself for an hour. I was withdrawn and cold towards my father, who often irritably confronted me.